All right, I got a question on how to pick port timing, kind of determining what numbers are best. There's a couple factors that go into that. As a generalization, 99% of stuff is going to fall in here. And that doesn't mean just pick three numbers that fall in this range. They all play together. So, especially like your intake and transfers, they are coupled together pretty well, and then your exhaust is kind of its own deal. Um, a lot of it has to do with your desired RPM range, like where you're trying to make power, the displacement of the engine, your combustion chamber design and how much compression you have, and the transfer design. If you want something that pulls way down low, your transfers don't need to be way up high, but I don't know why you just want something that was slow and pulled way down low. At that point, you're just sitting there. Essentially, you're overworking yourself because you're just going to apply a ton of pressure to whatever it is and take forever to make a cut. And this port timing it's more specific to chainsaws than anything else. Not talking about stuff with expansion chamber pipes, because like if you got an expansion chamber pipe, from what I understand, like bikes and stuff will have transfer timing that's like at 130. They might have 130 on a transfers and 100 on the exhaust. So it's way different for something with an expansion chamber. But these basic rules are still the same when you're talking about something with an expansion chamber. Or these factors are pretty much the same. They're not rules. So if you wanted something that pulled way down low, you may have like 75, 125, 105 on a 70cc saw. I don't really like that. That's not gonna be ideal for me, because we're trying to be fast and strong, not just strong down low. You do have things that'll limit you. Your chamber design and amount of compression is like seriously going to limit you. The less compression you have, the higher I would run the exhaust. And the reason why I wrote these numbers like that, when you're looking at your intake duration, the higher the number, if you're going before top dead center, the higher the number, the more duration you have. Now, when you look at transfers and exhaust, you're going after top dead center, so the higher the number, the lower duration you have. That's just that's just the whole reason why these are ascending and these are descending. And this doesn't need to be 106, it needs to be 108. And let's see, it's early in the morning, so I'm gonna be all over the place here. Transfer design, I'll pick two of similar displacement here to kind of show you what I'm talking about. This is a 346 cylinder. You have quad ports and they're closed. This is going to feed and scavenge much more effectively than an open port cylinder. So When I say it will do so more effectively, in order to keep velocity up on the open port transfer, you're probably going to have to run really, really conservative intake timing. That way you maintain crankcase compression and can still feed the cylinder properly. Here on the 346, you're probably not going to be limited near as much on your intake duration, because with the port being closed off and directed really well, your transfers stick way out and then shoot in. Your velocity is inherently going to be higher on this cylinder than this one, given all the same, given that all other variables are the same. And that's just because that's a more efficient and effective transfer design. This is old school. This is, I would say, new school. But new school stuff is Strato. This is, if someone was trying to go for all-out power, this is probably really similar to what you would find. So that's transfer design. Your other limiting factor is going to be the chamber design. If you have something that's got a really, really large squish band, it's not going to like a high duration exhaust near as much as something that's got a nice narrow squish band in a shallow chamber. Like if you pick your chamber, if you pick your corrected compression ratio and you have something that's got 40% squish band area versus something that's got 60% squish band area, the lower squish band area is typically going to favor the higher exhaust durations. And that's all other factors the same. The talking compression, transfers, yada yada yada. If everything else is set the same, the more squish band, the less duration. The less squish band, the more duration. That's just a generalization. I'm sure it doesn't hold true in absolutely every case, but there's so many different cylinders and so many different ways to do this that's the best I can do when trying to explain how to pick this stuff out. So when I do go to pick, again, this is a generalization. Now we're talking about actually picking numbers. What am I going to do? I'm going to take a tack, attach it to the handle, and go out and run the machine. And I'm going to check a few things. I'm going to try and run it in run the saw in a big piece of wood. And what I'm looking for is the RPM range where the motor feels strong. It's not stalling. You have a load on it. It's not just sitting there free spinning, but a loaded RPM range where it feels strong. That may be 8 to 10,000. That may be 8 to 12,000. You don't know until you tack it. Then I'm going to check stall RPM. So that means just steadily apply more pressure in a big cut until the motor tries to stall or the chain stops. Take note of that. And then after all that's done, I'll probably check the free rev RPM. Just as an anecdote, this really has no bearing on what numbers I'm going to pick. I just want to see how the numbers, or how my final numbers affect it. The next thing I'm going to do is do your muffler mods, intake mods, whatever you're doing that doesn't involve grinding on the cylinder. go do the exact same procedure, but after all your mods are done. That way you can see, if you had an RPM range where it felt strong, and then you do a muffler mod and muffler was all stopped up, and now all of a sudden it's way stronger, or it pulls in a slightly different range. You at least know. Now you can track your changes from stock to muffler modded, and then apply those changes to pretty much anything else that you're trying to do with that layout. So we'll use, for example, Echo 590 and 620 platform. If all of a sudden, if your exhaust gains 20% over stock, you're probably going to gain 20% over the ported run with the same exhaust. Like if you ran the ported saw with a stock muffler but versus a modded one, that 20% probably still carries over. So at least you know how it's going to act. Then you're going to time the cylinder, observe and note your stock numbers, and then I would adjust my measurements one at a time. So that would mean if I know that a 620 runs great with a 104 105 exhaust, I can set my exhaust, or we'll pick the 590, because the 590 stock numbers are like 77 or 78. Sorry, my numbers are all ugly. Then they come out at like 130 and 110 or something like that. I'll just scribble this and say 80, because this is what they come out after machine work on a 590 cylinder. If you go take this and run it, it's not going to rev very high, and it's going to want to pull in like the like a 5,000 to 7,000 RPM range. Now, if you go back and change it to 80, just leave it there, 130, 105. Now all of a sudden you're probably pulling in the 7 to 9, and that's going to be where it's really strong. That doesn't mean where it's necessarily going to be, it's just that's where it's strong. Now you free rev to, this may free rev at 9, this may free rev at 13. It may not get that high, but it might. Well, now if you change your transfers, say you're going to be 80, 125, 105. Say you still have that 13K free rev. Now you're pulling at 9 to 11K. That's just an example. It's going to be pretty close to actuality because I've just done a bunch of these. I can't remember exact numbers, but I know that there's something like this. This is machine cylinder, and it pulls way down low. This is a slightly modified machine cylinder where I changed the exhaust. Well, now I have more free rev, and I picked up a little bit of RPM here, but it's still not where you want it. So then you have to move your transfers. We've started with exhaust here, moved to transfers here, and then now we're at something that's reasonable. Anything that I want, I'm going to want to pull in that 9 to 12,000 range under a load. And then I don't care if it free revs. If it's got a 12,000 if it's got a, say it's got a 13,000 RPM rev limiter, and it pulls full strength at 13,000, totally fine by me. Do I have anything that pulls at 13,000? No. Do I have stuff that has a very small window from the end of the high RPM power band to the rev limiter? Yeah. But if you have full power at your rev limit, who cares? You don't have to worry about. I honestly don't know where I was going with that part, but this is just a rough example of the way things are going to change when you start changing your numbers. Things to keep in mind is make moderate adjustments. Your 50cc saw is not going to like a 98 exhaust roof the same way a 90cc saw would. Are there exceptions? Yes, but they're typically highly modified at that point when I'm talking 50cc saws. Your exhaust, kind of try to pick that based on displacement, at least to get you in the realm of something that's going to work. So the way I was taught, you can basically pick, you can say that a 100cc is going to need a 98 roof. Then you go 90, 99, 80, 100, 70, 101, 60, 102, 50, 103. I did that wrong, but you can see the pattern. Just say 100 starts at 100, 100 and 100, and then just go from there. Make the pattern. As you drop displacement, take away a degree of duration, and that will get you somewhere in the ballpark on your exhaust. Your transfers you set for where you want the power to be. And then make moderate adjustments. You're taking away. It's hard to put back. That's going to require machine work, and then you got to redo everything. So pick a moderate number first and adjust from there. I'd say in like 2 to 4 degree increments. If you have something where the exhaust is way stopped up here, well, here's where I'd use a 4 degree increment. Go from 110 to like 106. If you're already at a spot where it free revs pretty good, then maybe say instead of 105, I'm going to try 103. It's a lot of it is just having to get used to, learn how each one responds. I'm trying to think if I'm missing anything. Ignition timing can play a role. If something's not wanting to rev out up top, you may have too much ignition timing. If something's not wanting to say you changed all your other numbers, but your RPM range where you have pull did not change, maybe bump the timing 2 to 4 degrees. And if you bump it 4 degrees and then all of a sudden it shot up 1,000 or 2,000 RPM, well, you know that was the issue. If you bump it a couple degrees and it didn't change at all, probably not a timing issue. And try to keep about 40 degrees between these two. That's the number that I was taught with. You can use more, you can use less, so I'd say 37 to 45 is probably your crankcase compression. And again, that's not anything that's really easy to measure other than degrees. It's crankcase compression is kind of like blowdown, where it is very difficult to substantiate exactly how much you need, and you're just going to get a degree reading for you're just going to get a degree reading instead of like an actual measurement. Yeah, and I don't know, I have a video talking about my thoughts on blowdown. I don't think it's anything to use as a power metric. This is just a general rule. But again, I'm sure there's stuff that hardly has any gap here and does great. Like anything reed fed, you're not going to have degrees of like intake or cranking compression, because the reeds are what's sealing it off. So a reed fed motor may have 360 degrees of intake duration, which means that the intake is essentially open the entire time. You can't have 360 because at some point it's pressurizing the crankcase, so you're going to have 180. But point being that it's always open. There's nothing that's stopping. If you're jamming more pressure past those reeds, there's nothing stopping it. So big, long, complicated video. That there's not really a right answer. It's just stay moderate. If you go overboard on your intake, it turns into a turd and it'll have like a severe throttle bog coming off of when you stab the throttle, it'll bog real hard. It may run fine up top, but it could bog real hard off of idle, and you just really don't want that. You just want everything to match. Big takeaway, make moderate adjustments. Don't push any one too far. Your intake is probably going to be your least it's probably going to matter the least when it comes to power production. You just want to make sure that there's enough to feed the motor. So if everything else is sitting there screaming and all of a sudden, or everything else is numbers that should be great, but it just doesn't scream, and you check it and it's got 65 degrees of intake, maybe bump that to like 75 if you're at 120 and 105. Otherwise, just again, that's going to give you 45 degrees of cranking compression. That's a very mild, moderate number. Should be totally fine on any of these, but it could, if you got too much intake, it's going to be a turd. If you got too little intake, it's going to be a turd. And then anywhere between there is probably fine. You just don't want to push it too far either way. So, yeah, way too much rambling. It's way too early in the morning. Y'all have a good day.